Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Weekend Waypoints, a production of SEC Extra and D1Baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, coming to you live from Omaha, Nebraska. Game 1 and 2 of the College World Series due up today. First pitch for the first game here in about an hour and 45 minutes or so, let's call it. I'm looking forward to that. That'll be Arizona and Coastal Carolina. SEC doesn't get started until tomorrow on Saturday, with Saturday night, as a matter of fact, the last opening game of the tournament. That, of course, is the monster matchup between LSU and Arkansas. That's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to devote the Weekend Waypoint show on Saturday to previewing that, and then the Weekend Waypoint show on Sunday mostly to recapping that. Today, because we don't have any SEC playing today, a little different show. We're going to do some post-mortem on super regionals. We're also going to go through some news and notes items. Also, I won't lie to you, this will be a show that's a little bit on the shorter end of what we normally do. I could have pre-recorded this thing, didn't really necessarily want to do that, but if you're following our content along, you'll know that we just got done not long ago doing our live show this morning from the Omaha Experience, the Wilson DeMarini Evo Shield store, Louisville Slugger in there as well, and then I've got a Sirius XM show I'm doing here after that, and then I got to get to the ballpark, so I'm squeezing this into a tight window. But I wanted to get you guys a live show to kick off Omaha. Before we get into anything specific, I need to remind you that this episode of Weekend Waypoints and every episode of Weekend Waypoints is brought to you by Academy Sports and Outdoors. The sun's out and the fun is on at Academy Sports and Outdoors. Score a cool pool, savor summer with a grill, prep for fishing weekends, or mount up with a new mountain bike. However you have fun, you can't lose with our top brands. Gear up online at academy.com or at your local store. All right, folks. Let's start with some super regional post-mortem before we get to anything else, just because we haven't done Weekend Waypoints since that stuff wrapped up. Since we wrapped up, Auburn was eliminated by Coastal Carolina. That was a sweep there, and maybe the fact that it was a sweep was a little bit surprising, but the result in and of itself doesn't surprise me. Coastal was underseeded, and I get why the resume wasn't as strong just because of conference affiliation and what have you, but that was a very good team. No surprise that they're here. Auburn just got a tough draw, and vice versa, right? Coastal got a tough draw having to go to the number 4 overall seed, but Auburn played great in regionals, didn't play as well last weekend, and Coastal did, and that's kind of all there is to it there. If you're Auburn, though, nothing but major optimism heading into the 2026 season. Just when you consider how buoyed they were this season by freshmen, right? That the group of freshmen made this season what it was. Auburn would have been probably a good team even if they weren't quite that good. But what made them a borderline great team was the contributions of those freshmen. Not only in the lineup, but Christian Chatterton and Andres Alvarez, and Alvarez really came on late. Those guys really made the season, so they're back for 26, and among a number of other players for Auburn. And Auburn's been busy in the portal already, so. If you were looking to buy Auburn 2026 stock, it might actually already be too late. But it's exciting times for that program. I think that the atmospheres they had in the postseason at Plainsman Park, both in the regional and in the super regional, the first time they've hosted a super regional, I think are just exciting hints at what's to come for that program moving forward. So a lot of positive there, even in a series loss for the Tigers. And then, of course, we had Tennessee eliminated. That was a sweep as well. Again, maybe a little surprising it was a sweep, but the fact that Arkansas won the series, especially at home, not a surprise there. But even in it being a sweep, though, I feel like maybe we don't have the right to be totally surprised. Not just from the standpoint of Arkansas is really good and maybe is the best team in the country, and for my money they are, but also that this just kind of was what Tennessee was this year. They were capable of laying some eggs, and they did, a handful of times throughout the season. And in that second game of that super regional against Arkansas, they just didn't play well. Liam Doyle got hit a little bit, and the offense just wasn't there, and Arkansas kind of ran off with it and made it not much of a contest in game 2. So that was kind of what Tennessee's season was, unfortunately for them, is just kind of flashes of greatness and being really excited about the talent, kind of mixed with, having to temper that excitement because they just had games where they just weren't, they didn't look the part, right? Um, and I think what Arkansas did in that super regional, I think sets up well. They didn't get taxed that much in the super regional. That sets up well for here in Omaha. And with the way Zach Root pitched in that super regional, you have to be optimistic that, yeah, it's a tough deal when your first game in the College World Series means you're going to be opposite Cade Anderson. But if there's anybody who's got the talent and the pedigree and the track record to be able to go toe to toe with him in college baseball, it's probably Zach Root, or at least he's in that conversation. So that's what makes that matchup even juicier, is that it's a really, really good pitching matchup. So that's kind of the super regional recap. We'll have obviously more time to kind of do an obituary for these teams with Mark and I on Highway to Hoover moving forward into the off season. A few coaching things before we get you guys out of here. Again, like I mentioned, be a shorter show today just because tight schedule today with everything that I had going on here with live shows with the big group at D1 and radio show I'm doing here. Mike Farron, who you might know from ESPN, doing his radio show here before the games, and then got to get to the ballpark. So just had a tight window. So my apologies for it being a shorter show, but wanted to get you something today, even without SEC games being played. Saturday and Sunday shows will be a lot more substantive. But a couple of coaching things before we get out of here. Josh Jordan is from LSU is in the mix at Duke. He's not the only candidate there. Obviously, that's not a one-man race, but he's obviously a big-time candidate given the 10 years he spent with Chris Pollard at Duke as an assistant. And typically, especially now in college baseball, you might think, hey, does it make sense to take the Duke job, or do you just hang around at LSU and rack up a bunch of trips to Omaha, and maybe you'll be in position to be a head coach in the SEC yourself at some point? And that's true. That is a viable path for Josh Jordan. But also, I think you can't really underestimate how important Duke was to him in his coaching career, and I'm sure his family. You spend 10 years somewhere, it kind of becomes home. So I think this is one where if this was just a generic ACC head coaching job, maybe you kind of lean on, hey, do you really want to do that? Or do you want to come back to LSU where you have all the resources in the world and you can, if you continue to have success, you'll be able to kind of pick your destination. But I think this is different because it's Duke, because of his history there. I do think that is a little bit different. So other folks are interviewing, I've heard that. So they're not done yet on this. But it feels a little bit to me like it's a make Josh Jordan say no before you move on to other folks kind of situation at Duke, but we shall see. This morning, we also got news that Drew Dickinson, formerly the pitching coach at Virginia and before that Illinois, is going to be the pitching coach at Missouri, replacing Tim Jamison. I guess it was about 3 weeks ago, that Tim Jamison stepped aside as a pitching coach at Missouri. Obviously, Tim Jamison, longtime head coach at Missouri during their Big 12 days and the early stages of their SEC tenure, came back as a pitching coach to help out Carrick Jackson. Stepped aside. Drew Dickinson, I think honestly on paper, look, you never know. Sometimes things work out and sometimes don't, and you don't totally understand why, but Drew Dickinson, I think on paper, hard to think of somebody that Mizzou could have done better with. His history at Illinois, go look back at some of the pitching staffs they had at Illinois, and it's short on famous names. I'll save you the time on that. But the numbers were often great, and he did a fantastic job. Long history of taking Midwestern guys who were under recruited, didn't have electric stuff necessarily, and turning them into all Big Ten type contributors. And you have to think that if he can do something similar and take guys in the Midwest or, kind of the Mid-South, if you will, and turning them into borderline all SEC guys, that's a huge step forward for Mizzou when you consider where their pitching has been the last couple of years. And injuries played a part in that. I think it would be ignorant to not acknowledge that. But so injuries have been a part of it, but just, having someone with his specific experience in that role, I think is huge for this program. So I'm optimistic about it working. And you couple that with obviously the Omaha experience, having been here in Virginia, I think it's 3 out of 4 years. That's not an accident, right? Like, yes, it probably stung, and it sounded like he was blindsided by not going to Mississippi State with the rest of the Virginia coaching staff. And but I think that, Mississippi State, whether that's a good move or a bad move for Mississippi State, we'll see. But it's a gain for Mizzou that they had Drew Dickinson available to them to make that hire. I think it's a really strong hire, and if he's able to do some of the stuff that he did at those two places, and even Virginia, I think it's easy to focus on the Illinois part of it and say, look, I mean, that's within the context of the Big Ten. Illinois was not the easiest place to recruit to, especially during his tenure in Illinois. The facilities were behind. It was a tough place to recruit to, and yet he was able to find guys that maybe weren't stars right away, but developed into stars. And at Virginia, he kind of did the same thing, right? I mean, think about how many portal guys Virginia brought in that had nice careers at places, and they turned out being really valuable weekend guys for Virginia. I think about Brian Edgington, who'd had a nice career at Elon, but then he goes to Virginia and he's just as important. Nick Parker from Coastal Carolina was a guy like that. And there are other examples too that I'm just forgetting off the top of my head. I obviously have not been covering Virginia as closely as I have the SEC recently, but so he's done that kind of thing both places. It's not just the Illinois part of it. Now at Virginia, he obviously also coached some real dudes from a talent standpoint. And at Mizzou, he'll have an opportunity to have some of those guys too, more so than when he was at Illinois. But when I heard that and was able to break that news, I thought it was about as good as Missouri could have hoped to end up with in this coaching cycle. I really think that. So big time stuff there. We'll obviously see how it works out, but I'm looking forward to seeing Mizzou in the fall, seeing what they do in the portal, seeing what they do in the fall, seeing if how well their high school class holds together, and then really getting out there to Columbia and getting a look at what things look like with Drew Dickinson in charge of the pitching staff. Quick portal stuff, nothing huge there. Mississippi State, I mean, it's been very busy, so that's what I mean by that. But here we won't get into it too in depth. Mark and I will talk about this on Highway to Hoover when we just have more room to expound. As expected, Mississippi State got a lot of the Virginia players that went in the portal after Brian O'Connor moved from Virginia to Mississippi State, but not all of them. There's still some out there. Henry Ford, notably, still out there, but got a good number of them, kind of as expected there. Auburn, South Carolina, Georgia have been among the busiest teams, but everybody's been pretty busy. Like the SEC has obviously, as we've seen in previous off seasons, they are not shy about making moves in the portal early and often. It's kind of been the usual suspects, except for South Carolina. That is notable. They've done plenty of portal before, but this feels different in the way they've been aggressive and gone out and really got some good players. It does seem like there was an understanding, as Mark and I have talked about plenty this season, that this was a big offseason for South Carolina, kind of no matter what they wanted to do, right? You have to be better than last year. You have to be way better than last year. And getting into the portal was always going to have to be a part of that. And so far, so good. We'll see how well it works out, but at least the names and the track record of the players they're getting are a positive indication. So we will, as always, we will see. All right, folks, again, apologies for the shorter show today, but next 2 days will be more substantive. We have SEC games the next, to talk about, preview tomorrow and then a review of it on Sunday. We'll also touch on just the CWS field in general as we go along here, just to give Arkansas and LSU fans some context for what else is happening around the CWS. But today's show cut a little bit short, but I appreciate you guys hanging with me. I'll be back tomorrow morning. We'll preview Arkansas and LSU at length. We'll get into that. I'm excited to do that. Should be one heck of a fun matchup on the field between those two juggernauts. Thank you to Academy Sports and Outdoors for sponsoring this and every episode of Weekend Waypoints this season. Thank you, the viewers and listeners, for being with me here on Friday morning, and I will talk to y'all tomorrow.